So I'm going to say the Mishnah. It might be difficult to follow, and then we'll go through the sheet, and Bez Hashem, it'll make a little sense. So Rav to Chaf Daf Chaf Aleph, the Mishnah begins Chaf Amid Beis. The Mishnah begins on Chaf Amid Beis. It's the bottom line of the Mishnah. It says the Mishnah, "Ein maskirin lehem batim be'Eretz Yisrael." You cannot rent a house to a guy in Eretz Yisrael. We're worried if you rent a house, you may come to sell him a house. And if you sell him a house, we saw yesterday from Leisis Chanim, that's an issa of giving them a place in Eretz Yisrael. So one of the three things, matnaschinam, chen, and you can't go ahead and give a magam chanoya, a place to go ahead and be in Eretz Yisrael. So you can't rent a house to a guy in Eretz Yisrael because you may come to go ahead and you'll sell to him. So it's a gezerah. And you don't need to tell me that you're not able to rent a field. The Gemara is going to have to say what's the chumrah of the field, or that you can't rent a house, and certainly you can't rent a field. The Gemara has to say what was the certainty about renting a field. Okay, so that's the first place. The first place is in Eretz Yisrael. The second place is going to be Surya. The third place is going to be Chutz La'aretz. Why do we know about Surya? It's a place called Aram Sova. It probably is, that's where Syria comes from. And it was David HaMelech captured it. And we had a machlokes in Gittin, whether Kibush Yachid, Shmei Kiddush, or Lo Shmei Kibush. Whether the Kibush of a Yachid, without the consent of all the Klal Yisrael, to go ahead and be Mekavish, does it get a din of Eretz Yisrael or not? Good. If it gets a din of Eretz Yisrael, so the same halacha would apply. If it doesn't have a din of Eretz Yisrael, it should be like Chutz La'aretz. So as we're going to see, Surah is somewhere in between. So again, the first opinion, you can't sell a house and you can rent a house. We know selling from the last Mishnah because you can't go ahead and sell anything that's mechubal lekarka, and a house is mechubal lekarka. And also you can't go ahead and rent because you may come to go ahead and sell. And certainly fields not. The Gemara will tell you what's the tzarich about the fields. Ubis Surya, what can you do in Surya? Maskirin lehem batim. You could rent a house, avaloi sados, but you can't rent a sada. You can't rent a sada. So Surah has a one less darga than Eretz Yisrael, and the same as Eretz Yisrael. It has the same darga that you could you can't rent a field, but it has a mila that you could go ahead and rent a house. So again, let's go through it again. Eretz Yisrael, no renting, neither house or field. Surah, you can rent a house, but you can't rent the field. So regarding the field, it has the same darga. Regarding the field, it has the same darga. Uba Chutz La'aretz, and Chutz La'aretz, Moichrin, you could go ahead and sell a house, right? You could sell a house, which Umaskirin Sadais, and in other words, you could sell a house, which is, guys, nope. In Surah and in Eretz Yisrael, you can't sell a house. In Chutz La'aretz, you could sell a house. In other words, we were speaking about rentals until now, guys. Now we're discussing mechira. In Chutz La'aretz, you can even sell a house and certainly rent a house, right? In Chutz La'aretz, you could sell it. Umaskirin sadais, and you could go ahead and rent the field. Divrei Reb Meir. This is the opinion of Reb Meir. So I sent out a chart. Let's get the opinion clearly. I sent out a chart. Okay, Eretz Yisrael, and the opinion of Meir. So, could you go ahead and rent a house in Eretz Yisrael? No. Why? Because if you rent it, with geyser atu mechiras batim. If you go ahead and rent, you may come to sell. And we saw from the last Mishnah, you can't sell. What about selling a house? Clearly not. That's asa because lo yisachanim. That's asa. What about renting out a field? Says Reb Meir, certainly you can't rent out a field. You certainly can't rent out a field. If you can't rent out a house, you can't you can't rent out a field. And what about selling a field? What is the list? Okay. What about it? What about going ahead and selling a sada? The last thing, then certainly you can't. If you can't rent, certainly you can't sell. Why? And there's two reasons, as we'll see. So again, that's the first shita, the shita of Reb Meir. In this and Surah, let's go through Surah. Could you rent a house? Yes. There's no gezerah. You could, right? According to Reb Meir, could you sell a house? No. Could you rent a field? No. Could you sell a field? No. Of course, there's this Ered Chumrah, as we're going to see. We're going to see this in Ered Chumrah. Okay. So that's the shita of Reb Meir. Reb Yosi Omer, the Eretz Yisrael maskirin lehem batim. In Eretz Yisrael, you could rent a house. Look at the chart. So the first column, you see the yes. Avalei Sadais, he agrees. By Sada, you can't rent a field. Go down the right. Go down. Ubesura Moichrim Batim, you could sell, right? He disagrees with Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says you can't go ahead and sell a house you can't sell a house in Bavel in Surah. He said you could. Umaskirin Sadais, and you could even rent a field. But he would say you couldn't go ahead and sell a field. You could rent a field, you can't sell a field. So this is, again, you have a multiple machlokes in two places. So let's go through the places. The first machlokes is whether you can rent a field or not, rent a house or not, whether you can rent a house or not, right? In Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yossi says you could, Rabbi Meir says you can't. Gemara will explain the reason. In Surah, they both agree you could rent a house. Everyone agrees you can't sell a house in Eretz Yisrael, but Rabbi Yossi would be of the opinion you could sell a house in Surah. Regarding renting a field, Rabbi Meir says no, Rabbi Yossi says yes, and they would say selling a field would be asa. You see, selling a field is more chomer than selling a house. Again, that's okay. Now, what about chutz la'aretz according to Rabbi Yossi? What about chutz la'aretz according to Rabbi Yossi? Says the Gemara. Ubechutz la'aretz moichin elu ve'elu, and you got according to Rabbi Yossi again. Chutz la'aretz you have yes according to the board, except one thing. Light Rabbi Meir, you would not be able to go ahead and sell a field. Light Rabbi Meir, you would not be able to sell a field even the chutz la'aretz. Okay. Now we'll see the reasons. We'll go through the reasons in the Gemara. So we're going to keep the chart open most of the share, at least the first part of the share. Keep your phones open. Keep your phones open, and I'm going to keep it on the board over here so the people who are online can see it. Af b'makom concludes the Mishnah. Af b'makom she'amru lahaschir, even in a place where they permitted you to rent, like where you could rent. So, for example, you could rent in chutz la'aretz, or right, you could rent a house or in Surah, according to everybody, in chutz according to everybody, right? Loila beis dira. They didn't say you could rent it as a place to live. Amru b'fnei shehu machnis l'soicha avodas kechavim, because you're going to bring avodah Zorah inside of it. You're going to bring avodah Zorah inside of it, right? And therefore, you can only use it for an oitza. You can rent it out for a storage capacity. Shnamar, like savi tayeva al beisecha, do not bring a tayeva into your house. Ubechol makom lo yaschol yasne merchatz. In any place, no matter where, you should never rent a merchatz to a guy nikra al shmoi, because it's caused by the name of the yid. And Rashi tells us, "Va'aroya shemilchamim b'Shabbos." Someone sees you heating up on Shabbos, he'll say, "Shehabalonim shaluchin shal Yisrael hen." The balonim, the guys who go ahead and work in the bathhouse, they were sent by the yid, and they're working on Shabbos. Okay, let's go in the chart and see the reasons. Because we'll foreshadow you the Gemara through the chart. Why would you not be able to rent a house in Eretz Yisrael? Why couldn't you? You can't sell a house, guys. Let the second column. You can't sell a house. I wrote in the little parentheses. You have the issue of leisachane, right? You can't give him chania. You can't give a place. Right? You can't give him chania. Good. So that now Reb Meir is of the opinion with Geyser atam mechiras batim. If he let you go ahead and rent, you may come to sell. You may come to sell, and Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that what you can. Rabbi Yossi says we don't make the gezerah. Good, that's the opinion regarding that. What about fields? Rabbi Meir says that you can't go ahead and rent a field because we're going to atum mechiras sadais. If you go ahead and rent a field, you may sell a field, and Rabbi Yossi agrees. Now, why does Rabbi Yossi agree by what? By the fields and not by the houses, guys. Look on the chart. By the house, Rabbi Yossi says yes, by the house. By the field, Rabbi Yossi says no. What's the difference between the field and the house? Guys, you hear? He lets you, Rabbi Yossi allows you to go ahead and not. So the answer is that there's two reasons by the Sada that you can't go ahead and rent the field. One, right? You can't rent the field. One is that you can't sell a field, because if you sell a field, you're giving the chanim. In addition, you may come to sell. In addition, there's another issa. If you're going to sell a field to a guy, then it'll be mafkia midei maisa. The field no longer will be, the mitzvahs tli baris will not be accomplished. It'll be part of chumas maisa. So a guy is the chiris of the field that you may come to sell the field. That's why we're more stringent by renting a field rather than selling a field. Right? We're more stringent by renting than by renting a field and then renting a house. By a house, there's only one issa of leisachanim. By there, you have the additional issa, not only leisachanim, but also in addition, that the issa of taking off being mafkem chumas maisa. So that would explain that. So let's start the Gemara and we'll go back to the chart as Hashem. Again, for the first daf, it'll be very, very crucial, or else it's just a lot of words. My ain't sarach leimar. Okay, so the Mishnah began the shita of Reb Meah. You can't rent a house, and certainly you can't rent a field. Ain't sarach leimar. You don't have to tell me. You can't rent a house. You know what? Okay, so now, Elaim mishum de ispa tarti, what? Chada chanias karka v'chada kamaf galeim maisa. So the reason why the field is more chomer is because the house, there's only one isser of chaniya, of leisachanim. By the field, you have two, in addition to the chanim, you're taking off the halacha abad of chumas maisa. Ihachi bottom nami ikatarti. In the house also, there's two things. If you're going to rent a house to a guy, or sell it, chada chaniyas karka, the chada the kamafkale mimizuzah. Right? Not only are you going ahead and taking off the halacha of leisachanim, you're also over. You're going to be mevatel the mitzvah of mezuzah. So in other words, the opening line of the Mishnah, you can't rent a house to a guy, and certainly you can't go ahead and rent a field. What's the chumrah in sarach loima, the field over the house? Just like the field is two isurim, right? Chaniya and being mafka maisa, house as well, chaniya, and also the din of being mevatel mezuzah. On that, the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Mashiach, mezuzah chayves hadarhu. There's no chiyuv. It's not a chiyuv in the house. When you go ahead, guys, if no one lives in a house, you don't have to put up a mezuzah. The purpose of the mezuzah is for the person living in the house. A guy doesn't have to put up a mezuzah. The Havamina, the Gemara in the Kasha. If you're going to sell a house to a guy, you're taking off the halacha of mezuzah. You're not taking off the halacha of mezuzah, right? There is no halacha of mezuzah. Mezuzah depends upon who's living in the house. By karka, there's a din in the karka, regardless of if once something grows in Eretz Yisrael, it's mitzvah tliya ba'aretz, there's a chiyuv truma. If you're going to go ahead and sell it to a guy, now the fact that it's in the jurisdiction of the guy, according to the shita, it takes it off. It's not pshat that this house is mechuyev in a mezuzah, and if you sell it to a guy, you're taking off the chiyuv. There is no chiyuv. Unless you're living in there's no chiyuv. The mela, there's only one thing, and therefore you can't rent a house, and certainly you can't rent a field. Why? Because by a field there's two, and by a house there's only one. Good? Guys are good? Okay. Bisura, in Surah, maskirim batim, you're able to go ahead and rent houses, avalei sadas, but not field. So we said, let's look at it one more time. Okay, we'll look at it one more time. Let's contrast Eretz Yisrael and Surah. According to Rabbi, the guy says all the shittas of Rabbi. Rabbi says you can't rent a house in Eretz Yisrael. You could rent a house in Surah. You can, but in Surah you can't sell either way. You can't sell in Eretz Yisrael. You can't sell. The only difference, according by Rabbi, between Eretz Yisrael and Surah is what is the rental of a house. What? Field not. Field not. No, field not. Can't rent the field either. No, he says the same thing. You can't rent the field. So now, what's the reasoning? Maishna mechira deloi. What's the reason that mechira deloi that you can't sell him a house. Mishum mechir is there to Yisrael. So in other words, you allowed him to rent, you didn't allow him to sell. Guys, look at the second column. Look at Rabbi in the second column. Mechir is bottom. It says no, because we're goysa atu mechir in Eretz Yisrael. Correct? You see the second column? The second column, according to Rabbi, the no over here. What's the difference between this and this? Why does he allow you to rent a field, but he doesn't allow you rent a house, but he doesn't allow you to sell a house? That's the question. Ma'ishna mechira in Surah deloi mishum mechir Eretz Yisrael. If we allow you to sell a house in Surah, you may come to go ahead, what, and sell a house in Eretz Yisrael. Yehachi mischiris nami, schiris as well, nigzar, right? Schiris also, we should be geyser. We should be geyser schiris, that you should not be able to rent a house because you may come to go ahead and sell a house. Okay? In other words, we're not speaking about the fields. This is about the house. So look, the reason Reb Meir says you can't sell a house, no, is because you may come in Surah, you may come to sell a house in Eretz Yisrael. So why don't we say the same thing? Now, what's the answer? Now, here's a gezerah. The reason you can't rent a house, guys, in Eretz Yisrael is because you might come to sell in Eretz Yisrael. That's one gezerah. Now, what do you want to say? What do you want to say? You can't rent a house in Surah because you may come to go ahead, what, and sell a house in Surah. That itself is a gezerah. It's a gezerah. It says, "He gufa gezerah. Schiris in Eretz Yisrael is gezerah." Now you want to say that what? So you shouldn't be able to rent in Surah gezerah to what you'll sell. V'anon nekim v'nigz gezerah. Fred the Gemara 1 second. For schiris soda de besura, the rental of a field in Surah, the gezerah he. If you rent, now the havamina is, guys, is the reason why you can't rent in Surah, you may come to rent in Eretz Yisrael. Guys, listen up. The havamina is, since the reason I can't rent in Surah a field is because I may go ahead and rent a field in Eretz Yisrael. Now, renting a field in Eretz Yisrael is the gezerah to selling the field. Again, here's Surah. You should, again, in Surah you can't go ahead, what, in Surah and rent a field, right? According to Rabbi, here it is, right over here. You can't rent a field. Good. Why can't you rent a field in here? Gezerah with havamina is gezerah. You may come to rent a field over here, but renting a field in Eretz Yisrael itself is gezerah to selling the field. So it's a gezerah. That's like Fred the Gemara. Okay, so Fred the Gemara, great kasha. Like, why? If you're worried about gezerah, you should be able to rent in Surah, and we shouldn't be worried about renting in Eretz Yisrael, because renting in Eretz Yisrael is gezerah selling in Eretz Yisrael. It says hasam lav gezerah. Rental in Surah is not a gezerah. Why? Kasavar kibush yachid shmei kibush. That when David captured Surah, when he captured that land, it had the halacha of Eretz Yisrael. It has shmei kibush. It has the din of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore your goyza guys, your goyza schiris in Surah, atu mechir in Surah. That's the key. You're not goyza schiris in Surah atu schiris in Eretz Yisrael. Your goyza schiris in Surah atu mechira in Surah. And good. Look at the chart, guys. The reason why over here Reb Meir says you can't rent a field, because you may then come to go ahead and sell a field. You may sell a field, you see? And selling a field is no good, because kibush yachid is shmei kibush. So therefore it's not atu what? It's not atu Eretz Yisrael at all. The male is not a gezerah. Soda the ispatarti. Now you have a kasha, guys. So what's the difference? Why does Reb Meir not allow you to go ahead and rent in Eretz in Surah, yet he allows you to rent a house? If you're telling me that Surah has a din of Eretz Yisrael, you should not be able to go ahead and rent a house, because you may come to sell a house, and you can't sell a house because what? Kivush yachid shmei kibush. Guys, I'll cup. Guys, one more time. Look, if kivush yachid shmei kivush, let's use Surah as Eretz Yisrael. Good, and that's why you're telling me you can't rent a field because you may come to sell a field. If that's the case, you should not be able to rent a house because you may come to go ahead and sell a house. That's the kasha. That's the kasha. So how does the Gemara answer? Sada this patarti, sada that is two dinim, one chaniya and two being mafka midei maisa gazver rabbanan. Bottom, the less butarti by renting a house, the less butarti like gazver rabbanan. Okay, so they weren't geyser. So let's see the chart. Let's go to chart. Here's surah. Says Reb Meir, could you rent a house? Yes. Question is, why could you rent a house? If you can't rent a field, and as a din wad of, you can't sell a house. If you can't sell a house, how could you rent a house? You're telling me you can't rent a field, guys. Listen. You're telling me you can't rent a field in surah because you may come to sell a field in surah. But you're telling me you could rent a house in surah, and you're not going to that you might come to sell a house in surah. Why? Selling house in surah is asa. Like Reb Meir, right? It says no. You have to try to read it. Yeah, it's on the phone. Yeah, of course. You can't understand this without the phone. You can't understand it. So Gemara wants to know, guys, why over here he says no because of this? No, you can't rent the field because you may come to sell a field. Yet over here he says yes, you could rent a house, and even though we're not goyzat over here, what's the difference? Like Gaza, the Enkan Issa Daraisa Atumachira. There's no Issa Daraisa Atumachira. There's only the Rabbanan. So therefore, that's the reason. Okay? So very geschmack. Don't you like when I say very geschmack and you don't know what's flying? Again, if you follow the chart, it's not too bad. Without the chart, it's just words. Following the chart, it should make a little sense. Now, why we're finishing the shita of Reb Meir. So we did a shita in Eretz Yisrael, we did a shita in Chutz Laretz, and remember, he holds kibbutz yachid is shmei kibush, and that's why this field is usher over here. That's why it's usher, because he holds there's a din of Eretz Yisrael, and Memela, since you can't sell a field, you can't rent a field. Now, what about Chutz Laretz? You have yes across the board except one place. He says, like Reb Meir says, you can't, since there's two Isurim in Eretz Yisrael, we're going to say this now, since there are two Isurim in Eretz Yisrael, one Chaniya, and also being Mafka Mili Maisa, we're going to say that you'll sell in Eretz Yisrael if you allow this sale. So this is the only Chumrah. Yes, everything is allowed except one place, guys. The bottom line, you see the bottom line? The no. This is Reb Meir. Bottom line, the no Reb Meir is because why? Since two Isurim in Eretz Yisrael, we're going to say that you come to sell in Eretz Yisrael, and we won't allow to sell. B'chutz la'aretz, Soda the Ispei Tarti, Gosver Rabbanon, right? Soda the Ispei Tarti, that is two things. One, right here it is, two Isurim, Chaniya and what, and Mafkim Midei Maisa, Gosver Rabbanon, the less Butarti, but a house, the less Butarti, like Gosver Rabbanon. Therefore, you can rent a house. So that's the shita of what of Reb Meir. Now we're going to go through, guys, the shita of Reb Yossi. Now we're going through the shita of Reb Yossi. Reb Yossi says in Eretz Yisrael, Maskirin lehem batim avalei sadis. Let's go ahead and locate Reb Yossi, guys, in the chart. Reb Yossi, Skiris batim he permits. However, Skiris sadis he agrees. Skiris again. This is everyone says no. This is yesterday's daf. You can't sell karka. Mechiris bottoms. Mechubal karka is karka. The shaila over here, he argues over here, but he agrees over here. Now, my timer, what's the reason? Sodos this betarti. Sodos that you have two things that you may come to sell it, right? You may come to sell it, and therefore the geyser, burabanon, the geyser schiris atu mechira. The last two columns, you can't, mechira sada, you can't because it's two isurim. So therefore, Rabbi Yossi is in agreement, since there are two isurim, you can't go ahead and sell it, right? You can't go ahead and rent it. Bottom, housing, the less behutarti, they don't have two, only one, like gazru behem, they're not geyser schiris atu mechira. So therefore, he says you could rent a house. Guys, what's the problem? If you sell a house, you're giving chaniya to a guy in Eretz Yisrael? I'm not geyser that. Sada yam geyser, there's two isurim. This only has one, I'm not. So that's the machlokes, whether on that one you geyser or not. Reb Meir says you geyser in Eretz Yisrael, the rental of a house. The Chachamim say what? Reb Yossi says no. What does Reb Yossi agree by a field of schiris? Because there's two isurim. That takes care of Eretz Yisrael. Good? Now, what about surah? And we're going down the line. Now, Rabbi Yossi's opinion in Surah, he agrees that you could rent a field. He argues by selling a house. He argues by selling a house. Now, you know why he argues by selling a house? Why would you think? Because he holds kibush yachid, leish me kibush. He says, don't have an Eretz Yisrael. Good. Now, Ubasura moichrim, my time, it says, Surah, you can sell a house and you can rent a field, but you can't sell a house. You can't sell a field, but you could sell a house. My timer, ksava kibush yachid, leish me kibush. Okay, so guys, let's see. He argues, he says by the house. Here's this in Surah. He says you could go ahead and sell a house. You can't sell a field. You could sell a house. Good. Why is that? Sada dispeitarti, sada my timer. Ksava kibush yachid me kibush. So good. So guys, I can sell a house. What's the problem? It doesn't have a din of Eretz Yisrael. In other words, according to Rabbi Yossi, Surah is no different than Chutz La'aretz. Guys, according to Rabbi Yossi, Surah is no different than Chutz La'aretz. There's no din of Chanen. So therefore, you could sell it. Again, this machlokes in the middle over here. Rabbi Meir is of the opinion kibush yachid is shmei kibush. It has a din of Eretz Yisrael. Can't sell a house in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yossi says kibush yachid lo shmei kibush, and therefore you could sell in Eretz Yisrael. Now, why does he agree by schiris, selling a field? Right. If you can sell a house, why can't you sell a field? And here's the reason. Sada the ispeitarti, a sada in Eretz Yisrael that there's two gazver rabbanon. But that therefore what the guys is schiris of a field, selling of a field, not the selling of a house. But bottom, the less butarti, selling a house, right? You don't have to like gazver rabbanon. So that's his opinion by Surah. What about Chutz La'aretz? He goes yes across the board. What about the last thing? Look at his last column. Yes, since it's distant, he's not worried about selling land in Eretz Yisrael. It's far away. But Chutz La'aretz ma'achrin, my timer back in the Gemara, keeping the merachik like gazrinon. Since the merach we're not geyser. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Mishmul halach Rabbi Yossi, halach like Rabbi Yossi versus Rabbi Meir. The halach is like Rabbi Yossi. Okay. So therefore, it's nice. Okay, I think this was it's good. It's a geschmack chart. Without the chart, it's a bunch of verta. Okay, we don't have to chatzir up. Just feel bad it doesn't make the blog. Maybe I could send it to you. No, he can't import it. I don't know why. There's got to be a way. Get some technical help here, Dr. Press.
Why can't you scan? You should be able to just. You have a scanner. Just take
on a PDF. It's scanned on my phone. It's a PDF notes that gets it on the screen as a PDF, but it doesn't help him.
It's a space issue in the blog, in the WordPress blog. It's fine.
Okay. Okay. So Baruch Hashem, I think at least we see, at least for the moment, you feel like you know what went on over here, right? You saw it in front of you, and the thrust of the machlokes again is Rabbi Meir is more machmir, Rabbi Yossi is more mekel, and kibush yachid shmei kibush leish shmei kibush. Are you geyser? Because two versus one. That's why we're more machmir by fields than we are by housing. Okay. Rabbi Yossi, you could sell in Chutz La'aretz ubavach lo yasena shchuna. It should not become a neighborhood of goyim. You could sell them houses provided it doesn't become a neighborhood. The kama shchuna. Right? What is a neighborhood? Tana ain't shchuna pchusa mishleisha. There's no shchuna that's less than 3. So if 3 goyim are buying houses in Eretz Yisrael, that in Chutz La'aretz that'd be a problem. Mishleisha b'nei adam. Frag the bar v'leichish dilma ozl ha Yisrael umazon l'charev dikchavim. He'll sell to one guy. V'ozl heyach umazon l'trei, and he'll sell to 2 others. So notice they'll create a shchuna. So Amar Abaya al lifnei leisitin. One time. We had this Gemara earlier, right? That it's a simon. It's not exactly comparable because it's not lifnei iver over here. But we had it earlier, guys. When we had this Gemara, Silence is golden. There's a person here who should remember this Gemara, but he's not looking at me. Okay, what was the case? The case was the Levoina, let's say, for example. You're going to go ahead and Levoina, you're going to, they'll bring it. You can't sell Levoina to a guy who's going to be makveh to his Avodah Zorah, but you could sell wholesale. You could sell a lot of it. Fred the Gemara, why do you worry he's going to sell to someone else? You selling to him is one, him selling to another is two. So Taisus points out over here, this is not Lifnei Iver. Look at the Taisus. Lifnei Nafki. And Hai Simon Ba'almahu, Kloimar. L'kulei ha'lo chashinan. In other words, it's so much we're not chosh. It's not Lifnei Iver, but no, ad kadei kach, you're not going to go so far. You're not going to go so far. Okay, Gishmak. Okay, just as a derech hakdam, I sent out something else. I'm not. This might be a little overkill, but I knew I had a lot of time tonight, so I figured bring it in.
Oh,
okay, this is a piece from Michal Zilba, and it's a little hakdama to the next Gemara. You'd understand the Gemara without it. He explains the certain business relationships. The next Gemara is going to discuss a din of maris ayin. People are going to say, if you do some business with a guy, what people might say. We know a mir la'akum, to tell a guy to do something is asa. Beinli in Shabbos, beinli in Yom Tif. It's asa. So this is he gives a hakdara. So he says, Navi midivri ha-mishnah brura, behik the moisai, the simin in his hakdama, the simin reish mem gimel, shebir es haifanim hasurim midina, es hafanim shem midina mitarim. Those that are asa and those that are muta. So shloisha chilukim, there's three chilukim. Arisus, what's arisus? We call it sharecropping. Shesoicha es hagoy, sheyasim malacha besada oy b'merchatz, beharvachim oya peris yachleiku, and they're going to divide the loss or the gain, and whatever the percentage is, that's arisus. Whatever the percentage is, that's the percentage. Whatever the percentage is, that's going to be the din. Whatever the percentage is. Schiris. What is schiris? Shalom merchatz v'asad l'shana. You're renting a field or a field or a bathhouse for a year. What's the din? Hagoy noitel es kol arvachim. The guy takes all the profits. Oya peris, or whatever grows in the field shal shana. V'noisim Yisrael avur sadeu umerchetzoi dava katzev l'chol shana. So in other words, the Jew gets nothing, he gets a rental, but he doesn't have a piece of the action. By Arisis, they both have a piece of the action in the actual payris. By Schiris, you're getting paid. You're getting paid a certain amount, and that's it, but you don't have nothing to do with the kablanus. What's kablanus? Literally contracting. Kablanus is kol arvachim shaichem Yisrael. The guy is not getting anything. You're getting everything. By Yisrael noisin l'guy dava katzev l'chol shana avar pulasai. And the Yisrael gives to the guy a set amount from whatever his pool is, and that he has to give him. So again, three things. Arisus, they're both sharing. Schirus, the Jew has no part of the fruit, he gets a set. Kablanus, the guy has no part. The Jew has the part, and he's going to give a certain percentage. He's going to give, as a guy, he's going to give a dava katzev for his work. And the Mishnah Berurah explains, Sheshnei Aifana Rishonim, Arisus and Schiris, Midina he mutarim, bein besada bein b'merchatz. It's permitted to go ahead and come into a contract with a guy. Say what Indian rent sharecropping of merchatz is not shayach, but a field, and renting out a merchatz. Kimin she'agoy eino oises hamalacha avur haYisrael. He's not doing it for the Jew. Who's he? He's doing it for himself. Ella mishum sheichusay v'ravcha bedavar. Why is the guy working the field as a sharecropper? Because he's getting percentage of the action. Why is he working the bathhouse? Because he's getting the whole thing. It's schirus, he's getting the whole thing, he's paying for it, but he's working for himself. In both cases, the guy is working for himself. By arisus and by arisus and schirus, the guy is working for himself. Uvemerchatz asur chachamim mishum maris ayin. However, even though the guy is working for himself, you're not permitted to go ahead and rent it for, right? On I guess on Yontif. Asu chachamim mishum or Shabbos mishum maris ayin. Shekimin shein derech loses es merchatz by fanim elu. It's not normal to rent out a merchatz. It's not normal to go ahead and arisas, el aderech l'soichroi kepoil schreyoim. It's not, you don't rent it out for a year. You rent it for on a per diem, on a daily basis. Nira kamisha oises hamalacha b'shlichusai. So in other words, even though you rented it to the guy for a year, people don't know that because it's not the norm. They're thinking what you're renting it what for therefore when the guy is working, they're going to say he's working for the Jew. They're going to say so. Therefore, you can't do it. Mashen came besada shaterech lases ba'oifin shel arisus uk'shoisav arisus ein chashiv shoisav b'shlichusai lo yasru chachamim. The chachamim did not go ahead what and aser. So the merchatz would be asa b'schirus. The field would not be asa be'arisus because people know that there's such a thing as, and if the guy is working, they say he's working for himself. What about kablanus, where the Jew is really everything belongs to the Jew, and you got a double katziv. Asa midina mimerchatz. That will be asa. Kimin sha'agoy hu shlucha shal Yisrael. The Yid owns the merchatz. He never gave it to the guy. He contracted out. That's asa. That would be asa. Why? Because the guy is acting for the Jew. From layasa agoy malacha mimerchatz yafshar Yisrael sarevach shal yoyim. And if he doesn't work, he's going to take a loss. So these are the three dargis that the Chafetz Chaim goes ahead as a hakdama in Amir la'akam linyan Shabbos linyan these inyanim. Okay, so by arisus is no marasayin, merchatz is marasayin, kablonis is asa. It's not marasayin, it's asa. Why? Because he's taka working for you. So he's doing the work for you. Those are three dargis. Okay, let's begin the Gemara. You don't actually need this Gemara. You don't need Akdama for the Gemara a little bit, but not much. But again, we had the time, and it's a good piece of Torah to know. We said the Mishnah said, and af b'makam that they said you can rent. You can't rent a house for the purpose. You can't rent a house for the purpose of living there, because the brings avodah into the house. And the final din is in kol makam, you should not rent a merchatz ever, because it's called in the name of the Jew, as Rashi said in the Mishnah, and people are going to say that he's doing the shlichus of the Jew. So we said le'inyan schirus, it doesn't work, right? And kablanis certainly it's asa. Guys, le'inyan schirus it's asa maris ayin. Le'inyan kablanis it's not maris ayin. He's working for the Jew. Guys, you hear based on the hakdama. Guys, based upon the hakdama again. If you went ahead and rented it to him on a yearly basis, then it's asas maris ayin. If you went ahead and had him working for you, kablonis, then he's working for you, it's asa. It's not maris ayin, it's asa. This is Shabbos. This is Shabbos. Okay. So, af makam shom lahaska. Mechlal, ikaduchta, when it says over there, there's places that shom lahaska, places where they say that you could rent, right? Ikaduchta, loy mugrei. When it says there are places you do rent, it must be places that you don't rent. The sus makreb meya. It must be like Reb Meir, because Reb Yossi b'chol duchtei mukrei. Reb Yossi said you can rent anywhere, right? Yeah. So it must be that when the lashon was, if it's a place where you can rent, mashma there's places you don't rent, it must be like Reb Meir. It must be like Reb Meir. Baruch atah Adonai and mechulam shekol livebar. So it must be like Reb Meir who says what in Eretz Yisrael you don't rent. You shouldn't go ahead and rent a merchatz because it's called on his name. Okay, by the way, say Tanya. You should not rent your bathhouse to a guy. Right? Good. So this would be if it's kablonis, fellas. If it's schirus, it's maris ayin. Right? If it's schirus, it's maris ayin. Okay, this must be again based upon the akdam is geschmack. It must be what? It must be schiris because it must be kablonis. Schiris would be what marasayin. This is not marasayin. Lo yischa adam merchetza lo oivi kechavim mifnei shenikral shemoy v'oivi kechavim zeh oiseh b'malacha b'shabbos yom tovim. So and he's been working on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Avalakuti mai shari. Right. Why? Kuti ema avi b'malacha b'chol shema. I'm going to see in a second. Okay, guys. What about we know about the kutim, right? It's a million times. This is going according to the opinion that kuti ageri ms. This is before they found the pigeon up on Har Tzofim. right? So this is the Kuta Magari MS. But even when they were Gary MS, they were not so stark in the sack of the Chachamim. So Memela, they would work on Cholamoid. They would work on Cholamoid. Understandable.
Yeah.
They would work on Cholamoid. They weren't Chassidus, no. So they worked on Cholamoid, and but they didn't work on Shabbos. So now the Gemara assumes you can't rent to a guy who's going to work on Shabbos for Yontif, but you could rent to a Kuti because he's going to keep Shabbos. So the Gemara makes that diak. Aval Kuti mai shari, Kuti it will be what permitted. Fukuti ema avid ba malacha b'chol shalmaid. 1 second, the Kuti is going to do what malacha on chol shalmaid, because right, and the Gemara answers right. B'chol shalmaid anonami avdinan. We also heat up bathhouses on Cholamoid. In other words, Cholamoid we don't work. There's certain heterim, hefsid, tzarich. There are reasons for it that you could. Big. By the way, he brings down a big machlokes rishonim about the issue of working in Chol Shamoid if it's the rice of the rabbanon. All right, you're learning my cut now. You know the machlokes. I'll listen. We have a few minutes. I'll share with you this machlokes. That's a Rambam Perek Zayin Hilchos Yontif Rabbeinu Tam Riva Toisus Chagiga Daf Yudches Smag Raz Muva the Shiltei Giborim Varosh Vamordechai Vatur. You got a big lineup over here. Hasvurim Sheisam Malacha B'Chol Shemoy Midrabanan. The issue of working Chol Shemoy, you got many Rishonim. It's us the Rabbanan, and then you have a lot of Rishonim who say not the Rif, the Shiltis. Anyway, the Ramban, this is the one, guys. The Ramban makes a pshara. Shekol malacha she'ena litzarech hamayid ve'ena dava avid hu min ha'Torah. That we know. Again, but we know these are the things you're not supposed to do. If it's not a davar avid, it's not something you're going to take a financial loss, and it's not necessary for the mayid, then you can't do it. But he says the Ramban you can't do the raisa. Ushehi litzarech hamayid hi muteres af malachas umin. If it's for need of the mayid, even an umin, a craftsman, will be permitted. The afagav this beitirchi seir, even though what it's the yontif and he's have to work hard. If it's a tzarech mayid, it's permitted. The chen kol dava ovid, anything in financial loss. Afa pishein lit tzarech hamayid muteres. The afa pishi tirchi seira. Uvim malachas elu mutarim in atayra, and these are malachas that are mutam in atayra. The chum devreim asru kitzas malachas, and the chum they aser a little bit. The chriya bachla alacha, which in which. So again, so you be aware that there's a big machlokes rishonim. Ramban makes a pshar between the two. But anyway, right now, so the kuti, we're worried he's going to work on Chalamoid. So how can you rent to him? What's the answer? A bathhouse, so you'd also be able to work on Chalamoid. I guess it's a tzarech moed to get clean for yontif. It's a tzarech moed. You should be clean. Okay. What? Again, I'm not. I just threw it ahead. I'm not getting. Not go. What about renting a field to a guy? Shari, that would be permitted. Now, why could you rent a field to a guy? What's the reason? Let's go through a hakdama. Because people will say it's a sharecropping, and they won't be marasayan. That's why I brought it in. So my timer arisa arisuse ka'avid. So there's no marasayan. You're not working because again it's arisis. People are going to say you rented the field out. They're going to say what? It's merchatz nami amri arisa arisuse ka'avid. So why can't you rent a bit? Why can't you rent a bathhouse to a guy? They'll say that you're working for a percentage. It says arisa the merchatz le'yavi inshi. People don't do that. It doesn't work that way. Taka was good. Okay. Okay, we'll stop over here. All right.